What is going on today, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today's video, we're going to be throwing on the PBM kit, and you see this beautiful S14, well, heartless S14 here. It should be relatively familiar because it's Steven Tassinario's, and we are at his shop right now. And he's going to be helping us install the kit, which is a huge relief because I'm completely freaking clueless in this arena. So huge thanks to him. Normally I wouldn't drive, like 3 hours to go install a part of my car, but in this case, this being a very particular modification and the experience that Steven has in this chassis throughout the years, it's like a no-brainer to come out here. He offered, so huge thanks to him to even offering to help do this, because this cuts a lot of knowledge time that I would probably stress over, and the car would take entirely too long to work on. So we're gonna get right into it. So I really hope you guys aren't disappointed with yet another kind of commentary-ish video, but I'm afraid that's gonna have to happen. Otherwise, I'm gonna be showing you 8 hours straight of install video, which I don't think anybody wants to see, right? But we did get to finish the kit in 8 hours, which I think is pretty amazing. And let's just jump into how we did it. And I'm also going to cite 2 videos which helped me out a lot, or at least my understanding of it. Now, the first video I'm gonna cite is Ambush Drift's video. He goes over in depth how to tear down the suspension parts, and I just found it really helpful as a prep video. Now, even with all that prep, as you can see here, I still had my handful of fails, and luckily Steven was there to guide me and help me along the way, since I'm such a helpless little lamb in a garage, practically speaking. The second video we will get to later, but the gist of the first part of the install is tearing down literally everything. All the front suspension parts need to leave. Quick little tip here: if you're working on a lift, you always need to take off your trans cover beforehand. It's just a thing. There's no place to put it besides onto the cover, if you still have your cover. I'm one of the only nerds who still has mine. Now, you might be thinking, why are you sleeping on Steven here? Or what are you doing just thinking to the ceiling? But I'm actually helping him take the entire assembly off, knuckle included. Now, this is kind of up to you whether or not you want to take off the knuckle here or not at all. We chose not to do it at all, just for simplicity's sake, but it might have been easier to take the hub off later if we would have removed it from the control arm. So just something to think about. Really depends on how hard your hub is to get off. Now, you might have also noticed that we took the coilovers off. We are going to be flipping the top hats at a later point, which if yours are camber adjustable, you're going to want to do. So now we're going to be getting into the second video I'm going to reference, which is this gentleman's video. I cannot remember his name. He goes over exactly where to cut in great detail. You might look at his video, you might think, oh, I don't need to cut that far. You need to cut that far. You need to cut along where the steering rack is opening, where you see there where we made room for it, where Steven is drawing right now. You need to cut along that opening, and then also on the top, that way it clears the offset rack spacer, which you guys will see later. So the initial cuts, you're gonna be able to get away with a pretty big saw. You'll be able to make your starting cuts, but there's little to no way you're gonna be able to get into the last little corner without some sort of small blade. Now, Steven was kind of worried at this point of how we were gonna do that, but he wasn't aware of my magic weapon from my NA Miata back in the day, the old Dremel tool. So believe it or not, with some time, obviously, and patience, and quite a few metal blades, you can cut through this with a Dremel pretty easily. It just takes a little bit of time to get through it, obviously, like I said prior, just a little bit of patience, and eventually... Yeah! So now, logically, we can do the same thing to the other side. One thing I'd keep in mind is just because you cut once doesn't mean you're done cutting. There's a lot of adjusting. There's a lot of cuts that we kind of had to make a little deeper. if you're questioning whether or not you're deep enough or if you're parallel with that hole that you see there in the steering rack, just double guess yourself and cut deeper, go further. You really want to make sure you have as much clearance as possible here, just so the offset rack spacer can freely move and you don't create a limit of angle, which you really don't want here. For time's sake, I'm going to be cutting some of the work that we did after the final cuts where we did grind down the edges. Just keep in mind that we did that. You should definitely do it. Now we can move on to the steering rack and making the notch for it. We were originally going to use a grinding wheel and not a cut wheel. I'm sorry if that's the wrong term for the first one, but we ended up using a cut wheel so we could be more exact. And you can see here, Steven is making cuts and then checking to see if it's just enough for the teeth in the offset rack spacer, because there are notches in the spacer. Now this is a much preferred method than making a notch that is too big for the spacer and then it having room to play. So instead we opted to use the cut wheel, do a little bit at a time, cut and measure, cut and measure, cut and measure. And like, I cannot thank Steven enough for doing this, because you can even tell in this clip, like, it requires ultimate patience to do this kind of shit. And he really cares, and I literally will never be able to thank him enough. So once you've patiently notched your steering rack for the offset spacer, you can go ahead and tighten it down and then start checking for your clearances. We did have to double back. I'm not going to show it. Just know that we did have to double back, make a few more cuts, and make some more space for it, which is why I was so adamant about making sure you're just as deep as you can go. So after making all of our cuts, we cleaned it up, and I did my best to do a pretty good paint job of it, and I think I almost did such a good job that I need to take it down to dirt road now so it matches everything else. But regardless, this was actually a really fun part for me, just being able to clean up and also admire the work that we did, because I believe that we actually did very clean work down here, and I'm very proud of it. I would be happy to show somebody my subframe. So the next thing we did was tighten everything down now with the offset rack spacer, but we used orange Permatex to do so, which is specifically really good with vibrations as opposed to the blue thread locker. So here's the final setup with the offset rack spacer, all the cuts done, just so you can see it. I know it's kind of hard to see because everything's black, but regardless, we moved on then to removing the hubs. I mentioned earlier, could be easier if you take it off of the OEM control arm, but with a little bit of patience, it is perfectly possible. Next, there were some decisions that I needed to make in terms of Ackerman settings, which we'll go over in a second. But first, what I want to show is how I set my track width and also how we set the caster to start off. Now, big, huge, fat disclaimer. What works for me might not work for you. My preference or Steven's preference might not be your preference. So keep that in mind here as we go over the settings that we went with initially. Now, that's also important to note. This is just going to be my setup for now. It doesn't mean I can't change it in the future. That's kind of the whole point of these angle kits, is you can cater them to your driving style and kind of move them along the course of what you like, what you want to see out of your car. So now that we got that out of the way, we can go over what we went with for my very first drift setup. The top left there, you can see there's a little collar on it. That is a collar that PBM supplies, which essentially it helps protect your threads. But in this case, what we're doing is we're using it to set our track width. You can totally go further than this. I have more adjustability that way, but for ease of use and also just talking with Steven, he believes that this is not a bad setting at all to start with and to just get the feel of things. Now we can move all the way over to the right, which is going to be your caster settings. Essentially, the way that this works is it moves in and out, which moves your wheel either closer towards the rear of the fender, which would be your door, or closer to the bumper. being closer to the bumper is the most positive caster you can have and the most self-steer you can thus induce. That's generally what we look for in drifting, and that's the setting that we went with here. Now, the next decision you're gonna have to make is the Ackerman plates. You get 6 plates with the kit that range in severity of going towards parallel steering, one being the most OEM, the most stock steering feel, and then 6 being the most parallel steer possible, which allows the front wheel to get the most angle possible. Now, although that is generally a good thing for a street car, it's a little crazy, so we went with setting 3, which is going to give me some parallel steering, but it's not going to be so crazy that I'm going to be like understeering everywhere like an FD car. Now that all the major decisions were made for adjustments, we moved on to flipping the top hats, and I'll quickly explain why. Generally, when you move out your track width that far, it's going to force a lot of natural negative camber because your wheel was pushed out all the way, your top hat stayed the same. So we're flipping the top hat, and as you can see here, now that it's flipped, what was the max negative setting is now max positive setting. Now, it's gonna sound like I'm bullshitting you, but the rest of the install is actually pretty straightforward. Everything bolts up just like your OEM suspension did. I will say though, you wanna be a lot more careful with all these spherical joints and all these washers and sockets that are angled specific ways to go in specific ways. Beyond that, pretty simple, and we didn't have any issues. One other special item to note for the install, we receive S14 tie rods with our kit. It's not necessarily designed for the 8.6 FRS chassis, however, so it does require some shortening of the tie rod so that you are able to adjust as far as you're gonna want to when you're adjusting toe. Now, once you've made those cuts, it's also a very important thing that you go ahead and measure how long the tie rod is in whichever method you see fit. Find one measurement that will be universal, make sure and record it. That way, when you order tie rods or you break a tie rod, you know exactly how much to cut so that you can reinstall your tie rods and get right back to action. So after making the cuts on the tie rods, we were ready to bolt everything back together, and this is when it really started getting exciting for me. Just seeing all the gold come together, all the little bits and pieces that make up my current suspension now. I'll just note, make sure you are tightening everything as tight as you can, but also remember that you should really go back and tighten everything the next day after it's all cooled off. I think this is very, very important because in my case, when I did do that the next day, there were a few things that I did find loose. So make sure and do that the following day. Now, we're just about to get to the last modification that we had to do, but I just had to step back and take a look at the money shot. Even if I did bash my head so hard on Matt's bash bar, there it is. All beasted out on maximum toe and just looking absolutely ridiculous. So back here.
Right here, hit.
Okay.
So we can try to maybe take that spacer out and see if we can go all the way in here.
Okay, yeah, because right now...
What do we have? See this? So we still have more we can try and get.
So we can take that spacer out. Yep.
So we can try no spacer here.
Very cool.
And if we hit it again, we'll cut that head in half so that we have even more room.
Okay, we'll start there then.
That's a good sign. That's a good sign. Yeah, let's try that.
Dude. So as you can see, most of the kit is on, or the entire kit is on actually. And what we're doing now is just making clearance right here on this bolt. And what Steve's doing is grinding it down so that when this comes across, it has more room to try to hit the limit before it hits anything here as the limit. So we're like creating where our bump stop is gonna be. The original bump stop is like here, but the angle we're getting is kind of friggin' ridiculous. I'll show you guys in a second. The alignment's better than when I came in. It's literally better. It's definitely like catching on, or it's just heavier. It's a lot heavier.
It'll be heavy.
Bro, what the f?
It's got a lot.
Can I just look at it like this for a second? You think we're good? Yeah. Let it warm up.
It's chilling.
Oh my God.
You'll see pictures too when you get it real loaded up that it'll just push even more. It's cool. Because you'll never get full lock just sitting here parking.
Bro, thanks so much, man. You killed that all day. Thank God for the Dremel though, you know what I mean?
It actually did come in.
Shout out to the Miata. The Dremel would have never existed without the Miata. Yeah, dude, that looks so good. And we're like fully in here. I only have a tiny bit more left, obviously, too.
Load it up a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead. Woo. Yeah, like that. God, Jesus. That's fully loaded now. So that's what it'll look like, yeah, like full flying.
It fell back a little bit. So your in drift bump is even more. It's wild. See how the tire's jacking like that? That's good. So you're gonna go almost to lock and then it's gonna stop and the rest of it you can do manually if you want.
Significant, I gotta start working out again.
Yeah. The steering's heavy.
It's no longer like a little child's toy, for sure. I felt that immediately, so yeah. So that pretty much concludes my install of the PBM kit, or our install, Steven's install in actuality. Obviously went out for a test drive, made sure everything was solid, felt pretty good. We brought it back in, made sure the toe was aligned, you know, decently well enough to hit the road. And then that's what we did. It was a very, very successful day, 8 hours in total of, install. And I literally will never be able to thank Steven enough for his expertise, for his knowledge that he relayed to me, and just the patience of dealing with a noob like me and installing something of this complexity. Now, the next day, obviously, I went in and just made sure everything was tight. Did find a couple things a little loose here and there, so just buttoned them up and then went out for a quick little test drive. The car does have like a huge tendency now to like understeer like hell when you go full lock, kind of like FD cars do, but you can kind of hear not a whole lot of rubbing. So, and it's literally like practically turning on itself right now. I don't know if you can see that. It's literally turning on the back wheel right now. That's amazing. I think we have a pretty successful angle kit right now. Oh my God, yeah. I mean, that's not that much rub. And it could just be a little bit of the tire scrubbing that we're hearing, not necessarily rubbing. So that's like an extremely positive sign right there. Man, this little test, very confidence inspiring though, I must say. Feel that little amount of rub, or, you know what I mean? Like, it's like the light at the end of the tunnel is what I pretty much saw there. Was like what needs to happen, or I have an idea of what needs to happen for the car to be able to just like pivot like crazy and how I want it to pivot. But that in itself was like really cool to see back there. I'm very, very happy. Big thank you to PBM. They actually surpassed my desires and needs. Like, they went beyond what I think anybody would typically ask of them to do. And I was like kind of a little bit anxious on shipping times and stuff. And they actually just went ahead and like next day'd my shit as soon as they got my parts from Japan or from wherever they had to come from. They just literally took it upon themselves to next day it, which was really, really nice of them, and they didn't have to do it. I already paid for like some kind of standard of shipping, but obviously not next day. So they got it to me so fast that I almost didn't know what to do with it, and I was so happy with that. And you know, obviously huge goddamn massive thanks to Steven, who without him, like, I would not be this confident, and I don't think we would be this far into the setup of the car and getting ready to like practically go to the next private day to test this thing. So like, I'm stoked. If you have any questions, as always, leave it in the comments for these types of videos. That way everybody gets something out of it. That way if they're also installing a kit, it might help them out. So that is gonna be it, guys. I will catch you on the next one. Leave a like if you enjoyed it. Like I said prior, leave a comment if you have any questions. Subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this, or, you know, potentially us test the living shit out of this car pretty soon. And I will catch you guys on the next one. Peace.